Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video, we're going to be talking all about the upright row exercise. Upright rows, depending on who you talk to, can be an interchangeable exercise with the lateral raise. Maybe some people actually prefer them over the lateral raise. And for some people, they are considered disastrous on your shoulder health, and you should avoid this exercise and never do it. We're going to break through all that stuff, see what the science says, and we're ultimately going to come to the conclusion that this is actually a really good exercise to target the middle deltoid. And yes, to some extent, it could be interchangeable with the lateral raise. So first things first, what are the targets on the upright row? Well, the target here is the same as it is in the lateral raise. That is the middle deltoid. It's also not a bad exercise for targeting the trapezius. Now, I'd make an argument that rows, that is your standard row, maybe some variations of the shrug, are better for the trapezius. But it can't be understated that upright rows also hit that muscle. And to think that you need to abolish trap activation on an upright row is just false. We just want to make sure that in terms of the glenohumeral joint, that the deltoid, that is the middle delt, is the prime mover. But this is also a fair exercise for targeting the traps. Now, two big claims that we're going to ultimately debunk in this video is that number one, the upright row is bad for your shoulder, causes shoulder impingement and all this kind of nonsense. We'll address that at the end of the video. And the other big claim is that this exercise is inferior to lateral raises. As it turns out, this is more of a practically interchangeable exercise with the lateral raise, and a lot of what you do just simply comes down to preference. Maybe you like one over the other, or just simply varying your exercises every once in a while just to keep things interesting. But let's get into the form considerations and how to execute this exercise flawlessly right now.
Now, before we get too far into upright rows, how to execute them, all sorts of form considerations, let's do a brief review on lateral raises, which we talked about in the previous video. Make sure to check out that video. I'll put a link to that video in the comment section of this video. So I mentioned in that video that when it comes to dumbbell lateral raises, there's a lot of different variations, but most of the time people are generally doing one of two things with the elbows. They are either keeping the elbows straight or near straight. And when you do this, what you want to make sure is from the side that your pinkies stay at the very minimum at the level of the thumbs, or the pinkies slightly higher than the thumbs. Because if I start to have the thumbs higher, well, then that's switching the focus to the anterior deltoid. And of course, we're talking about middle deltoid here. The second way people do them is they do them with the elbows bent. And in this form, you want to, at the very minimum, at the top here, you want to have your elbows slightly higher than the hands, or at the bare minimum, at the same level. Because if the hands are higher, well, then that's switching focus more to a little more dynamically on the infraspinatus and teres minor, and then also the anterior deltoid. So if elbows are bent, we want elbows driving up and elbows being at least at the same level as the hands or slightly higher. Now, when we're thinking of a corollary between lateral raises and upright rows, as you might imagine, we're not concerned with this form on the lateral raise. We're only concerned with the elbow bent form. And with the lateral raise, of course, as we go up, shoulder abduction, but elbows are staying about on level or slightly higher than the hands. But you'll notice in this that the elbows don't actually change angle. They stay the same angle the whole time. As opposed to an upright row, I'm going to use a barbell for this demonstration, but you could use a dumbbell in each hand, or you could use an undulated bar like an easy bar, depending on how it feels on your wrists. We'll get there in a minute. I start with the elbows straight. As I come up, I drive up with the elbows, and you'll notice I end up in exactly the same position that I do at the end of the bent elbow lateral raise. The only difference now is that the elbow is actually straightening as we go down, and then of course on the concentric part, it's bending as we come up. So yes, this exercise absolutely hits the middle delts. In fact, it can hit them quite well. But it's no longer an isolation exercise, because now we have contribution from the elbow flexors as we come up. And by elbow flexors, maybe quite a bit less biceps. They're fairly deleveraged here. So we're talking mostly about the brachioradialis and the brachialis underneath the bicep, which is a powerhouse of elbow flexion no matter what type of movement we're doing. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that after we talk about form considerations on the upright row. Now, of all the cues that I use to get people to execute this correctly, I would argue the first two of these are the most important. Those are keep the chest up and open as we drive the elbows up, and number two, drive up with the elbows, not with the hands. If I ever feel bad about myself, sometimes I come back to this video right here of Andrew Tate trying to demonstrate to his audience an upright row. It's hilarious to me because every single thing he's doing with this is wrong. This is arguably the worst upright row I've ever seen anybody do on the internet or in person in my entire life. That is a terrible upright row, and if you do that, it's no wonder that your shoulders hurt when you're doing this movement. In fact, he's not even getting the deltoid as the prime mover of this. He's probably actually getting more elbow flexors on it. So let's talk about it. When you're doing an upright row, okay, you want to make sure that you're not going down into it, okay? As you drive the elbows up, you are opening up the chest, right? We've already talked about keeping your elbows higher than your hands. Chest is open. Do not close down the chest as he was doing in that video. As you come up, open up the chest and come back down. If you go down like this and almost like you're trying to bring your chest down to the bar, that's going to make it more likely that you're going to have impingement related shoulder pain. We'll get to that at the end of the video. Not that impingement is actually a real thing, but again, you're more likely to have pain in your shoulder if you do that. The second of those big considerations is drive up with the elbows. Yes, your hands are holding the object, but the hands are just hooks. They're just coming along for the ride. Don't even think of having hands. Push up with the elbows as if you're trying to elbow somebody behind you that's pissing you off. Don't actually do that. Don't do that. Drive up with the elbows. This also makes it easier to keep the elbows higher than the hands at the top, okay? If you drive up with the hands, you're more likely to let the hands come higher than the elbows, not necessarily, but you're more likely to, and you're more likely to, through central motor command from the brain, recruit more elbow flexors. We want to minimize the elbow flexors, understanding that they are inevitable to contract and we have to use them for this movement, but we want to maximize percent recruitment of the deltoid. The deltoid has no leverage on the hands, only the elbow flexors do. So don't drive up with the hands. Think of the resistance being applied just proximal to your elbows at the distal end of the humerus and drive up with that point, keeping the chest up and open as you go, okay? So here's the real talk. A lot of people will say, don't do this with a close grip, or they'll say, don't do this with a wide grip. At the end of the day, you have to see what works for you. If you're doing this with a narrow grip and it allows you to drive up with the elbows, keep those higher, get maximum mechanical tension through the middle deltoids, and you don't have any issues with your shoulder, your elbow, or your wrist, great, do that. If you find that taking a wider grip allows you to do the same thing, and it feels nice on your shoulders, elbows, and wrists, and a lot of middle deltoid, then do that. Maybe for you, it's somewhere right in the middle, okay? At the end of the day, the width of grip makes very little difference in the movement. It's what feels the best for your body mechanics and body anthropometrics, and also what allows you to maximize mechanical tension in the middle deltoid. Very similar consideration for the height that you lift this. A lot of people will find that if you take a narrower grip, you don't have to lift it quite as high to get that tension in the middle deltoid. And that's okay. If you go a little bit wider, you might have to lift the bar a little bit higher to get that middle tension in the middle deltoid. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of people only need to go so high that one, they can keep the elbows higher or equal to the hands and maximize that middle deltoid stimulus. Now, some people like to quantify it in terms of, bottom of the sternum, mid-sternum, clavicles, even sometimes as high as the jaw. If you find that your shoulders feel nice and good and you can go upwards towards the jaw, do that. You might call that a super range of motion upright row. Notice my elbows are about on level with my hands. That's about as high as I would feel comfortable going. If I go higher, again, now I'm recruiting a lot more of the external rotators of the shoulder and switching the emphasis to the anterior deltoid. And so it doesn't do me any more good, assuming I'm just going after middle deltoid. Now, at the end of the day, remember that the upright row is technically a compound movement because we can't help but recruit some of those elbow flexors like brachioradialis and brachialis. So some people will say, well, then the lateral raise is just a superior exercise because it isolates the deltoid. And it is true, most people who train to get bigger delts will do lateral raises and do just fine. But to say that the lateral raise is the superior exercise is not entirely true, okay? Let's suppose for a minute that each of these dumbbells is 15 pounds. I believe they actually are 15 pounds, okay? And I'm doing lateral raises. And this puts a certain amount of mechanical tension through my middle delts. 15 pounds each, so that's 30 pounds total. Let's suppose, this is not the case, but let's suppose this barbell was exactly 30 pounds, so technically 15 pounds per arm. If I do this, remember that the overall load has to then be distributed between the deltoid and the elbow flexors. So technically, dumbbells, it was 15 pounds each. Upright row, a little less than 15 pounds each. And some people would then conclude then that the lateral raises are better. But realistically, because I have help now from other muscle groups, I can just lift more weight overall, more load. So whereas a lateral raise at a given weight might have a given RPE, rating of perceived exertion, a heavier weight with the upright row would at some point match the same RPE. And if you're looking at it in terms of reps in reserve, reps in reserve. So long story short, you can just lift more weight overall in the upright row and get the same mechanical tension through the middle delt with a similar reps in reserve and a similar RPE. So all in all, the upright row is not an inferior exercise and the lateral raise is not a superior exercise. They are, for all intents and purposes, in terms of the middle deltoid, they are functionally interchangeable. Practically the same exercise, just one is isolation and one is compound. They are both incredibly useful for targeting the middle delts from both a strength and a hypertrophy perspective. Now, the only limitation of the upright row is that it's less versatile overall, because obviously with the lateral raise, I can do it with dumbbells, but I could also go and do this on a cable machine and emphasize a different portion of the range of motion. Okay? Maybe I find, or someone else finds, that the cable lateral raise, where you're loading this in the non-abducted position, is actually better for hypertrophy for that person, right? Maybe it's better than the lateral raise they find. Well, you can't really do that with an upright row, okay? So understand it's overall less versatile. But again, for loading the deltoid in this 90 degrees position, phenomenal exercise. Now, one other consideration with upright rows, and that is, as you are driving up, there's going to be a little bit of lower spinal extension that is, for the most part, inevitable. If you find that at heavier loads of the upright row, that your low back isn't liking that too much, there is a way around that, and that is the cable upright row, which is done in a supine position laying flat on a bench. Now, when I do cable upright rows as a working exercise, I use just that, a cable machine. But I'm going to demonstrate this with a band like this and a lat bar that you can hold on to. You can equally do this exercise with a band set up like this if you don't have access to a cable machine. But band or cable, I have it set to a height that's approximately sternum level, okay? It can be a little bit below, a little bit above, not gonna make a huge difference, but give or take about sternum level. And on this bench, I don't have it reclined all the way, so I'm not totally supine. I have it just one increment above that because I like to be able to look up and see what I'm doing. Same rules are going to apply here. Just imagine you're standing upright, okay? You're going to drive with the elbows, and I like to do this where I attempt to get the bar and just tap my forehead and then come back down. Drive up with the elbows, tap this to the forehead, come back down. When you're in this end range position here, you can kind of look over, and does it look like your elbows are closer to that direction behind you than your hands? Okay, I'm not here, I'm here. And as long as that's the case, you're in good shape. The other big consideration is, do you feel your middle deltoids working? If you do, great, you're on point. Can you do this with a narrower grip? Yes, you can do it with a narrower grip. You have to see at the end of the day what works best for you. But those same rules that we just talked about, they still apply.
Now, getting a little into the sciencey stuff, not necessarily on the effectiveness of the upright row, but more on, is it really a dangerous exercise for your shoulder and it causes impingement and all this stuff? And I could certainly go into a little spiel on this, but I'm going to actually let Dr. Susie Squats on Instagram actually take the lead for this one, because she has this post on her Instagram, and I think she summarizes this flawlessly. So for lack of creativity, I'm just going to read what she has here, and it pretty much hits the nail right on the head, particularly with upright rows. More along the lines of impingement. Based on the literature, shoulder impingement is an outdated term that is no longer recommended as a diagnosis, source of pain, or cause of rotator cuff tears. So where did the term even come from? What actually happens in the shoulder joint? And what truly causes shoulder pain? It was once thought that as we raise our arms up overhead, such as we would do in a lateral raise or overhead press, the space between the top of the arm bone, that is the humerus, and the hook of the shoulder blade, the acromion or acromial process, gets smaller, resulting in compression of the rotator cuff tendons, bursa, and ligaments. And you can actually see the subacromial space right here. You learn about it in PT school, probably in medical school also. And this decrease or apparent decrease in space of that subacromial space is the cause of the issues that people have in the shoulder joint. After a while, too much compression was thought to wear down the rotator cuff tendons, leading to pain and tears. And shoulder impingement was coined by Dr. Charles Neer in 1972, who based his beliefs on findings in cadavers in surgery. You might have heard of Neer's test, which is technically a passive test, but basically you elevate the shoulder more in the sagittal or scapular plane with the pinky up and thumbs down, and people with impingement oftentimes have issues with that movement. It's called the Neer's test. Ironically, he developed the subacromial decompression surgery, where the acromion is shaved down to create more space, because the acromion was part of the structural considerations that were decreasing that space. His methods were based on theory and have unfortunately continued to influence the medical field 50 years later, despite there being no concrete evidence for support. Studies have found that the subacromial space is actually smallest around 40 to 70 degrees of raising the arm overhead. So that's not at 90 degrees, where it would be on a lateral raise or an upright row. That's more like right in this range. So very little amount of shoulder abduction. If you wanted to avoid this type of impingement, you would need to keep your arms glued to your sides like a tin man. No more washing your hair, putting on your clothes, or getting cups out of a kitchen cabinet. In most individuals, the rotator cuff tendon has passed under the acromion and is no longer in a position to be compressed by 90 degrees of arm elevation. Additionally, the subacromial space has been found to increase with shoulder internal rotation, not decrease. Therefore, we can no longer label upright rows as a dangerous exercise for shoulders. When you're doing an upright row, you're actually more in a position of shoulder internal rotation, because again, the elbow is higher than the hand. If we were to go more like this would of course be more of an externally rotated position, but this is more internal rotation. And internal rotation actually opens up the space, especially as you're going up into this 90 degree of shoulder elevation. So realistically, upright rows creating impingement, absolute nonsense. If you are somebody who has pain with upright rows, it's most likely due to one of two things. Either number one, It's not just upright rows. You also have pain with lateral raises in the abduction plane. You have pain with overhead presses, especially if you were to do them behind your head, right? So it's not exclusive to upright rows, and more than likely due to either a shoulder mobility issue, a strength issue in the rotator cuff muscles, et cetera, a load management issue, whatever it is. It's not exclusive to the upright row. Or number two, it's more of a skill / coordination issue with the upright row, and you just need to practice it more to kind of get the motor program down. And then once you kind of get the muscles coordinating with each other and the sequencing better, it's not going to be a problem. Okay. It's not due to any kind of actual rotator cuff issue or impingement. That is utterly nonsense. And I'll even add on top of this that there were studies that split up people into two groups. One group had this subacromial decompression surgery, and the other group got a sham surgery. They got knocked out, cut open, stitched back up, but they didn't fix anything. They didn't shave off the acromion. Guess what? Following up these people, there's no difference in outcomes. And then you can see all these PubMed IDs. So you can look at the literature if you're more interested in that. Long story short, upright rows do not cause any kind of shoulder impingement. They can't, because in this position, first of all, the abduction angle, we're beyond the angle where you would even have impingement. And second of all, we're in a relatively more internally rotated position that should actually open up the space rather than compress it, which maybe you might have in a more externally rotated position. And any pain that you have with this is probably not exclusive to the upright row, or probably due to a skill and coordination issue. Coordinating all the muscles, because it is a compound movement. And it's not one that most people do a lot of. And so you try it once or twice, it doesn't feel too good. You probably weren't doing it well and probably not minding the cues that we talked about earlier on in the video. I can promise you, if you work on this exercise, start small, start good with good form, progressively overload with time, this can be a monster exercise for growing and strengthening your middle delts. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much.